You know, um, we spend a lot of time patting ourselves on the back as a species. Like we built the pyramids, we went to the moon, we created the internet. But if you look at the raw biological data, the pedestal we put ourselves on gets a lot shorter. We are nearly 99% identical, genetically speaking, to chimpanzees.
Yeah. It is a staggering statistic when you really think about it. It basically means that everything you consider human, like Shakespeare or space travel or complex ethics, all of it is running on a tiny 1% sliver of unique code. The rest is pure ape. And the mission of this deep dive is to investigate that 1% difference. It is essentially a detective story about how a standard primate model got a sudden massive upgrade.
Right, and to understand that upgrade, you have to look at the original hardware. The source material highlights our two closest cousins, and they are shockingly different from each other. On one side, you have the
Mm.
common chimpanzee. On the other, the bonobo.
Yeah.
And honestly, the chimp reads like the relative you desperately avoid at Thanksgiving.
They certainly have a darker side. Yeah. I mean, we used to think war was a uniquely human invention, but chimps actually engage in lethal aggression group warfare and even infanticide.
Jeez.
Yeah, it is brutal. But they are brilliant, though. They sharpen sticks into spears to hunt small primates called galagos, which shows some really advanced planning.
Okay, so then you have the bonobo, formerly called the pygmy chimpanzee. The literature describes them as the hippies of the primate world.
That is a pretty fair assessment, honestly. Bonobo society is matriarchal, so the females run the show. And their conflict resolution is incredibly unique. While chimps use violence, bonobos use sex.
And they aren't picky about it either, right? Like
Yeah.
same-sex and group interactions.
Exactly. It is the social glue that keeps stress low and altruism high in their communities.
But the most interesting insight here is why they split. The research points to the Congo River as this massive evolutionary divider.
Right. It is a classic story about scarcity versus abundance. On the right bank of the river, chimps had to compete with gorillas for food. That scarcity drove the aggression and competition. But on the left bank, where the bonobos evolved, there were no gorillas.
So the bonobos basically had an all-you-can-eat buffet with zero competition.
Essentially, yeah. That environment of abundance allowed them to self-domesticate into a peaceful society because they just didn't have to fight to survive. But while environment shaped their behavior, the research shows that a specific genetic rewrite shaped our brains.
Okay, this is where Catherine Pollard's research on human accelerated regions, or HARs, comes in. Because this part is just wild. She found chunks of DNA that barely changed for millions of years in other animals, but went absolutely haywire in humans.
It is the smoking gun in our DNA. If you look at HR1 and compare a chicken and a chimp, creatures separated by 300 million years of evolution. That specific code only differs by 2 letters. It is incredibly stable.
2 letters in 300 million years is barely a typo.
Right. But between a chimp and a human, it changed by 18 letters. In evolutionary time, that is a sudden explosion. HAR1 is active in the developing brain, and it is likely what allows the cerebral cortex to fold.
Letting us pack significantly more brain power into our skulls.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the brain either. The research highlights HAR2 as the dexterity update. It regulates wrist and thumb activity.
Which likely gave us the fine mover skills to move beyond just using a sharp stick like the chimp to crafting complex multi-part tools.
Spot on. Then there is FOXP2. People usually call this the speech gene, but the paper suggests it's more about motor control than vocabulary.
That is a crucial distinction, actually.
It really is. We share a version of FOXP2 with Neanderthals, but it differs slightly from the chimp version. It basically controls the fine muscle movements of the mouth and face, giving us the physical ability to articulate complex sounds.
Which eventually became language. So we have the fancy genes for speech and thumbs. But here's the twist in the research. The gap between us and them is getting blurrier. You have to look at the story of Rackus.
Oh, this is an incredible observation from Sumatra. Biologists watched a wild orangutan named Rackus with a nasty wound on his face. He didn't just lick it. He chewed up a specific vine called Fibroria tinctoria.
Which locals actually use for pain and inflammation.
Right, and he applied the juice directly to the wound as a poultice.
That implies he understood cause and effect. He diagnosed himself and applied a treatment.
It does suggest a level of cognitive processing we usually reserve for humans, and it ties right into self-awareness. We know chimps, orangutans, and bonobos pass the mirror test. If you mark their face, they touch the mark on their own skin, not the reflection.
They know that is me.
Exactly.
And when you combine that self-awareness with the language experiments like Kansi the bonobo, understanding 3,000 English words, it gets ethically complicated.
It brings us directly to the Great Ape Project. They argue that if the cognitive hardware is largely there and the emotional capacity is proven we can't treat them as property, they believe these apes should have basic legal rights like life, liberty, and protection from torture.
It is a compelling argument. If an orangutan can act as its own doctor, and a bonobo can understand your sentences, the line between human and ape isn't a wall. It is a gradient.
We are basically just a slightly polished version of the same model.
It definitely makes you look in the mirror a little differently.
Nope.
The only difference is 18 letters of code. Are we really as unique as we claim to be? That is something for you to mull over. Thanks for diving in with us.